Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Parna, host of Beyond 1 Million Fireside Chat, strategies to grow your company, irrespective of the industry you are in. In these segments, I have the privilege of speaking with entrepreneurs and experts on what it takes to scale and transform your business to 5 million and beyond. My guest today is David Chang, who actually needs no introduction. But for those of you who don't know him, he is a GM of Hunt Club and a serial entrepreneur, an angel investor, a huge supporter of innovation and entrepreneurship. Welcome, David.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Our paths have crossed over the years, of course, David, and recently we both served as judges at Startup World Cup Boston, where we got to hear from amazing founders and the work that they're doing. Isn't it rewarding to be part of this community, right? And getting to know the different founders and all the amazing work that they have been doing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I was privately hoping for the Boston one to carry the World Cup, and so it was nice to see them go so far.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like for me personally, and I'm sure it's for you too, it's just such a privilege to get to see and meet these entrepreneurs. And yes, the path to entrepreneurship is not easy, as we know, but they're out there and bringing their ideas to life, and it's just amazing to see that
Yeah, a ton of fun.
for sure. So, before we get started, how about you tell us a little about yourself and what's some of the stuff that you do to help the ecosystem?
Yeah. So the quick background on me is I'm little bit of an accidental entrepreneur, and so about 20 years ago, I got involved in my very first startup coming right out of business school, and just got absolutely hooked into the whole scene. And so fast forward to today, I've now been with six Boston-based startups. All told, we raised about $150 million of capital, returned about 750 of it back to investors, and then along the way, I've also invested in just over 100 companies myself as an angel investor. Today, my primary role is GM at Hunt Club, where I help companies grow both through talent, getting the folks that they need to grow their business, as well as developing some software that enables people to really envision who's connected to whom. And and then through that whole process, continue to help companies. I'm also one of the co-founding members of TBD Angels. We've done just shy of 90 investments. Many of them are based in the Boston area. And I like to think of myself as someone who is now plugged into lots of different circles. And so I'm happy to help however I can.
That's awesome. So, as an investor, maybe that's where we start. As an investor, what are some of the things that you look for in a startup?
Yeah, in the early days, as part of so much of it is around the team. And as an early stage investor, you're really trying to figure out like whether or not this team is tackling a problem that they have some differentiated advantage in. And so it does seem like no matter what the industry, it all comes down to the folks that are tackling the problem. Two, the product itself. Have they found something? Have they found a solution that's differentiated? And three, is it big enough of a market and is a real pain point? And I find that every one of these investments, it's some combination of those three things that you look for.
No, excellent. So, one of the reasons why we are launching this, this fireside chat is to kind of help a very niche group of founders. So we've seen there are like so many accelerators, so many programs that help investors, like especially early stage investors. But oftentimes the founders are struggling to go from that 1 to 5 million. So in your experience, what are the key factors and challenges that you see these companies who wants to grow to about 5 million?
Yeah, and for a little bit of context, I've been with companies at the 0 to 1 phase, and 1 to 10, and 10 to 100, and beyond. And I have found that from the 1 to 5 to 1 to 10 stage, there are definitely some characteristics that are pretty common across all of these startups. There's another local entrepreneur investor. His name's Rags Gupta. I don't know if you've met Rags before. He wrote a fantastic book It's called 1 to 10, going from startup to scale up. And this is, I guess I'm plugging his book, even though I didn't intend to. But I found that so many of the lessons that startups and founders have learned over the time that they've built their startups are encapsulated in that particular book. And I remember off the top of my head a handful of things that are really common from the 1 to 10 phase. So the 1 to 10 phase, you tend to have a product that's generally complete, right? Doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's enough that people are buying it. The market itself, you've gotten to the 1 because you're largely hustling and it's largely probably your own network. And so from the 1 to 5 and the 1 to 10 phase, here's the first time where you're trying to convince someone to buy the product, and it's not you that's doing the selling, right? And so here's where you actually have to recruit and build a go-to-market team. And so the non-founder sales begins to kick in, and then that leads to the growth of the team. And so those things kind of pull together at that 1 to 5 and 1 to 10 stage are really critical. And so before then, you can kind of scotch tape and glue everything together. Your product may not be there. Your go-to-market's largely trying lots of different segments. And then in terms of people, you're doing it yourself. And then from the 10 to 100 phase, it becomes really different. So that's the true scale up. Here's where your process kicks in. Here's where you have multiple products. You likely have multiple segments that you're selling against. And so that 1 to 5 is a really interesting point of a time that founders need to figure out like how to actually break beyond that barrier. And a lot of the lessons I think that Rags covers in the book are ones that I've seen, ones, mistakes that I've made. And I do recommend it for folks to take a quick look at the book, because I think it's it's a well worth the read.
Excellent point. So when a company is growing from 1 to 5 million and you're looking to invest in a particular startup, what is the one thing that you look for? Is it the founder? Is it the founding team? Is it product market fit? Like, what is the one thing that says, maybe they're not there yet, but with our help, with this investment, they can get there?
Yeah, at that stage, honestly, it's still a lot about potential. And so if you're going to write that very first check-in where there's no traction, it's the idea, it's a ton of intangibles. And at the phase where you've started to generate some sort of revenue, and at that $1 million mark, you've convinced enough people that there's something there. And so as an investor, the main thing I'm looking for at that stage is this something that has the potential to be 10 to 100 to 500? And it's really, and still not a ton of data there, but that's ultimately what you're looking for, especially for ventures that are VC backed.
Yeah, definitely good point. You also touched upon scaling the team. So at what point should the founder or the founding team decide that they have taken the company as far as they can go, and it's time to bring in the experts, whether it's freelancers or hiring their first talent? When do you think they should realize that the company needs more than the founding team?
Yeah, partner, I think it's pretty different for different industries and different founders, and depending what he or she, like whatever the background is, that they'll cross this point at a different point in time. One common thing that I've seen is you can scale, or you need to scale when maybe one of two things happens. It's either there's some internal repeatable motion that you're finding yourself doing again and again. And this could be product, this could be go to market, it could be anything within the company, but it's like some human task that you're repeating over and over again that really can be encapsulated. And so prior to AI, the only way to really do that was to hire someone who could do that. And so that's a pretty key inflection point, that you're finding a repeatable motion. And so think of that as, as a concrete example, maybe you have been the primary salesperson, even though maybe that's not your background. You've closed the first couple of sales and you've gotten to the point where you're doing $1 million. And you're finding that now, in order for you to repeat, wash, rinse, and repeat, you're doing those same motions. And that's a really great time to pull in someone who's done that and just focuses that and really nothing else. So then you can go and build other parts of the business. And so that's one potential inflection point. The other that I often see is a point where you hit, maybe you don't have those repeatable motions, but you're in a place where there's enough work that gets done across the board, or needs to get done across the board, across different functions, that if you can pull on someone who's senior enough that can take the burden off of you and so figure out the problem. I can't remember where I saw this article, but it was a really good one, which was describe like who is a true VP, and forget titles and hierarchy and all that, but it was the article had described it as someone who takes work off your plate. And so if you imagine managing someone, that person is giving you 80-90% leverage, where they're doing more than kind of the active management of that person. Like that's someone who's truly part of your exec team. And when you're at the 1 to 5 to 10 phase, that's when some of those folks really come into play.
Really good points. Now, let's talk a little bit about how do you motivate these people, because there's a talent war going on all the time, irrespective of market conditions, right? And oftentimes startups lose out because they are not able to pay as much as the Googles of the world can pay you. So how do you find the right talent and also motivate them when you cannot quite pay them as well as the larger companies?
Sure, sure. You mean like beyond the equity,
Yeah,
dangling the
beyond
equity
the
carrot?
equity.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's a big motivation for lots of startup folks. In the early stage companies that I've been part of, there's some non-monetary motivations that I've seen. And one really big one is when someone joins, they likely have some aspiration after your company. And though it seems kind of weird that if you're considering someone, it's like, what are they going to do afterwards? But I found that one of the biggest motivating factors for people to join a company is the ability for them to further their career in some form or fashion, right? And so they think of this as a training ground. They think of it as being part of a winning team. They can look at and join this company because they're going to not only learn a lot, but also like build up their skills so that they can excel at the next role. And so that's one way to do it. Another is if you're working either in a space or you have a mission, and this is pretty common with social entrepreneurship, if you're working in a space or has a mission that deeply resonates with that person, that's another way to motivate someone. And I've been a part of a few ventures that have been at the sort of intersection between for profit and also that something had a broader social mission. A recent one was one where we were working on reducing student debt, and so it deeply resonated with people. And so that's another way to motivate someone along those lines. And maybe the final one is a lot of people in those early days, especially if you don't have startup experience, they do want to be part of a winning team. And so if you even take the skill set out of the equation and the resonance of the space out of the equation, the ability to win with a team, to be part of a band that's putting out hits is a really big factor. And so in those early days, when you can't dangle a very big paycheck in front of them, these are some of the factors that really matter to people.
I love that you said, that the making an impact and think bigger, because that is like my personal passion. So every startup and every company that I worked at or I work with now, we always try to come up with a way to become a purpose-driven brand. Whether you're impacting the planet or society, but there has to be some good that's coming out of your technology or your service other than making money, which obviously is really important. So I'm so glad to hear you talk about, wanting to make an impact. So really
Yeah.
good
And
point.
hats off to you. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the startups and some of the ventures and founders that you've worked with. And so it's really clear the problems that they're tackling are deep rooted problems that need to be tackled. And so I love the fact that you're supporting them.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I find really interesting there is that when I'm kind of working with them to reposition the company or get them ready for with their go-to-market strategy, they often don't realize that their technology is actually doing more than what they have envisioned. Whether it's
Oh,
helping.
that they stumbled upon something that
Yeah,
was bigger
yeah,
than
they
they
really
thought.
did. And when I said, "Oh, do you realize you're actually making an impact, on the planet? This is like your whole sustainability strategy, or do you realize you're helping, people with limited mobility be more independent?" And they're like, "Ah, yeah, So you just have to like they're so focused on getting the technology and the capabilities built that they often forget that it can do bigger good. So
Yeah, yeah. I
so
think that's a really interesting dynamic, right? Like in the early days, you need to both have the big picture vision of what this ultimately could be, and that's the 5, 10 years down the line. And you also need the next credible milestone. And so when you're working with these founders and they get to a point where that they've built something that now actually shows more promise than they expected, it's key for them to try to retrofit that back into this big vision. Like, how does it support it? This is an asset that they hadn't thought about. It's a lot of the in the 1 to 5 phase, a lot of this tends to happen. So I'm glad you're doing this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one more question as we talk about challenges, right? I have seen, and I'm sure you have too, when people are hiring, sometimes they land up hiring not the right person. That, it's like, okay, we really think we need a CTO here, and they bring in this high powered CTO only to realize that this person doesn't quite know how to do hands on work because in a
Mhm.
startup, you are not delegating, you're like literally rolling up your sleeves and working. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you have seen in terms of managing people or hiring people to make sure that those first few hires that are so critical are actually done right?
Yeah, there's I guess there's a couple different aspects to that. And so one that you just mentioned, which is around the ability for them to perform and operate at that stage. I've seen in very few cases founders that can scale from inception to product market fit to scaling to beyond that to IPO, right? And so I think most people, including myself, have a sweet spot in terms of what that range is, and you don't really know in the early days, right? That like what that is. And so the mistake that I've seen founders make, and exactly what you described, is that you'll bring someone on board because their LinkedIn or their resume looks like they've got all these great skills, and they find that when they're in this environment where they have to be broader and do more than they had previously done, or do it with fewer resources, maybe that's a better way to describe it, that they can't downshift, and because of that, it's a very awkward fit, and for sure that's happened quite a bit. And so one of the tips for founders who are looking at growing their teams is looking for someone who has specifically done the stage or have gone through the stage of growth that you're currently at, and maybe even like one stage beyond that. And when you look for that person, you find that person, you want to know whether or not they've done it in the past. And you also want to know whether or not they want to do it again. Right. And so I find that's like really key. And I've met plenty of people who have done it and they don't want to do it again. Right. They feel like, oh, you know what? I've played that role before. I've been at that stage before. My next thing is something else. And something else could be bigger company, something else could be a different function, in which case then they're learning and also contributing. As someone who's looking for talent, that's one thing to absolutely keep in mind. And what you'd want to find ideally at this stage to avoid the mistake that you were just referring to was to find that person that has both those things, right? The ability and also the motivation to do that. Myself, I know I thrive at the 1 to 10, 1 to 5 to 1 to 10 stage. And so things that are earlier, it's not that I couldn't do them. I know people that are just a lot better at doing those. And then beyond 100, it's not that I couldn't do those things, but there are other people who would be better fit for that particular stage.
Yeah, and I think, you just said that you also have to be aware of your strengths, right? Because having worked in the corporate world, I have seen the CEOs coming in for, that stages, like, you can take a company to 250 and then you need somebody to take it to that 100 million or whatever. So yeah, I think being aware of your own expertise is just as important as who's hiring you, right?
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic there, right? I can't remember who had said this. I think it was actually it could have been like an actor or someone in the media that had said in those in the early days when he was trying to land his first gigs, he was very focused on growing areas that were weaknesses for him, right? And so I guess this applies to startups, to sports, to kind of anything, and found that that methodology, while made him a better generalist, didn't really make him stand out in any sort of way. And then when he'd flipped to there's certain things that he was particularly good at and he played to his strengths, was really able to differentiate. And so I think the challenging thing as we grow as humans that you want to do a little bit of both, right? Like you want to play your strengths, but you also want to broaden yourselves. And that seesaw balance is something that's very, very hard to strike.
Yeah, no, for sure. These are all fantastic tips. Thank you so much, David. So, as we wrap up, what is the one tip that you'll give to an entrepreneur who is trying to grow his business from 1 to 5 million?
Yeah. The single thing that I would recommend that founders look at this particular stage is to keep in mind that the value of the company builds in a step function, right? And so the what got you to that 1 million is not going to be what gets you to the next order of magnitude of growth to 5 to 10 million. And the key thing to keep in mind is because it's some other factor, you have to build your startup in that way. And so to be a little bit more concrete, as a startup grows, your value is based on the sum of a lot of different things, right? The team, where the product is, the fit in the market, your ability to execute, your resilience, and kind of all those things. And when you get to that one phase, you've shown some of those things, but really to kind of get to that next level, and maybe selfishly from founder perspective, kick it into the next valuation tier, you have to de-risk some other part of the business, and it's likely not the part of the business that you have been working on. And so that single tip is going to be focus on, when you look forward to the next 24 months, what is the thing that will qualitatively put your company in a different place? And when you think about that, and you may have to ask some of your customers, you may have to ask some of your advisors, your investors, your other folks in the industry to figure out what that thing is, and then focus on that one aspect.
Great point. Thank you so much, David. It's been such a privilege talking to you, and thank you for sharing your expertise. I know that some of the points that you mentioned is going to be super helpful to startup founders. So thank you again for all that you do for the community and the founders.
Same to you.
Thank you for being on this fireside chat. Super grateful to you.
Thanks so much for having me.